In 1990, on the BBC program Tomorrow's World, a man named Maurice Ward did something that should have been impossible. Ward was not a scientist, he was a hairdresser from Yorkshire. But he had created a plastic-like composite he called Starlite. In front of millions of viewers, a raw egg coated in a thin layer of starlight was subjected to a 1200-degree flame for 5 minutes. When the egg was cracked open, it was completely raw and cold to the touch. Most heat-resistant materials work by reflecting heat or slowly charring. Starlite was different. Scientists from the British Atomic Weapons Establishment, AWE, were skeptical until they tested it themselves. They subjected Starlite to a laser beam that would have burned through a diamond. Starlite didn't just survive, it absorbed the heat and dissipated it so effectively that the material remained cool enough to touch. The implications were world-altering. Space shuttles that would never burn up on re-entry, firefighters in suits that could walk through infernos, military tanks that were immune to heat-seeking missiles. NASA offered Ward millions. The chemical giant, ICI, tried to buy him out. But Maurice Ward was a man haunted by a singular fear, that the government would seize his invention, classify it, and hide it forever to protect the billion-dollar industries it would disrupt. He demanded a 51% stake in any company formed, a deal no corporation would sign. In 2011, Maurice Ward died. He never wrote the formula down, he never patented it. He took the most important material science discovery of the 20th century to his grave. Step back 30 years. Year is 1960. The CIA began funneling money into bioelectronic research. The hypothesis was simple yet terrifying. If the brain operates on electrical impulses, then those impulses must be susceptible to external electromagnetic fields. Subproject 119 focused on techniques of activation. They weren't just looking for a way to monitor brainwaves from a distance, they were looking for a two-way street. Think of the brain like a radio. If you know the frequency, you can listen in. But if you have a strong enough transmitter, you can override the station. The CIA wanted to know if they could entrain the brain, forcing it to sync with an external signal to induce sleep, rage, or total paralysis. One of the haunting aspects of Subproject 119 was the study of the Frey effect, or microwave auditory effect. In 1961, researcher Alan Frey discovered that certain microwave frequencies could be heard as clicks or hissing inside a person's head, even if they were stone deaf. The sound didn't enter through the ears, it was generated by the expansion of tissues inside the brain in response to the microwave pulse. The CIA saw an immediate application: internalized voice transmission. Imagine a soldier in the field or a political target in their home suddenly hearing voices that no one else can hear. No headphones, no speakers, just a voice inside their skull. Subproject 119 was the electronic blueprint for what would later be dubbed voice-to-skull technology. The documents for Subproject 119 are heavily redacted, but what remains describes biotelemetry. This involved the remote monitoring of physiological data. In the 1960s, this was science fiction. They were attempting to record heartbeat, respiration, and brain activity from hundreds of yards away using radar-like sensors. They wanted to know if a target was lying, panicking, or sleeping without ever touching them. But the activation part of the project was the dark side. Could they use those same frequencies to induce those states? Could they beam a low-frequency signal at a diplomat to make them feel a sudden crushing sense of depression or anxiety during a negotiation? Subproject 119 was the birth of neuro-warfare. It taught the government that the most effective way to control a person isn't to change their mind, it's to change their frequency. Subproject 119 was officially terminated in the early 70s during the Church Committee hearings. But in the world of intelligence, projects don't die, they just change their code name. On a humid morning in June 1959, a group of high-ranking Army officials walked into the Pentagon carrying 4 massive volumes of technical data. This wasn't a proposal for a new tank or a jet. It was a blueprint for a colony. In 1959, the United States didn't even have a rocket capable of reaching orbit reliably. Yet here was a plan, complete with budget sheets, architectural drawings, and survival protocols to build a military base on the moon. Not by the year 2000, not by 1980, but by 1966. This wasn't NASA's peaceful mission for mankind. This was the U.S. Army's plan to seize the ultimate high ground. This is the story of Project Horizon. To understand Horizon, you have to understand the man behind the math, Wernher von Braun. While the world saw him as the face of NASA's civilian space race, he was simultaneously working for the Army Ballistic Missile Agency. Von Braun knew that the moon wasn't just a destination, it was a vantage point. The Horizon report calculated that the moon provides a view of the entire Earth once every 24 hours. The Army's goal was clear: total surveillance. From the moon, you wouldn't need a fleet of spy planes. You could watch the entire Soviet Union through high-powered telescopes, monitoring troop movements and missile silos in real time. But to do that, you needed a permanent, living presence. Let's talk about the sheer mechanical insanity of this plan. The Army estimated they needed to move 490,000 pounds of equipment to the moon. Their vehicle of choice? The Saturn A1. The report called for 2 launches per month. Think about that. In an era where rockets exploded on the pad 50% of the time, the Army was planning a lunar conveyor belt. The construction phase. 2 soldier astronauts would land first to scout the site. Automated landers would drop lunar shovels, massive remote-controlled tractors designed to dig deep trenches into the moon's regolith. 12 metal cylinders, each 10 feet in diameter and 20 feet long, would be lowered into these trenches and connected to form a subterranean village. By burying the base under 3 feet of lunar soil, the soldiers would be protected from the 250-degree heat of the day, the -200-degree cold of the night, and the constant rain of micrometeorites. The base was designed for 12 men, specifically chosen for their psychological dullness. The Army wanted men who were experts in engineering but had a high tolerance for boredom and isolation. They would be powered by 2 nuclear power plants buried in separate craters. This wasn't just for lights and heaters. They needed enough power to manufacture their own oxygen by heating lunar rocks. But the most controversial part of the plan was the defensive perimeter. The Horizon report detailed M18 Claymore mines, modified for vacuum use, and surface-to-surface missiles designed to destroy Soviet landers. The moon wasn't going to be a laboratory, it was going to be a kill zone. By late 1959, President Eisenhower realized that the militarization of space would spark a global panic. He stripped the Army of its space funding and gave the keys to NASA. The fortress on the moon was replaced by a flag on the moon. The 149 rockets were cut down to a handful of Apollo missions. Project Horizon was classified and buried in the National Archives for decades. But critics argue we lost more than a military base. We lost the infrastructure. If we had followed the Horizon blueprint, we would have had a permanent city on the moon by 1970. We would be a multi-planetary species today. While NASA was trying to populate the moon, a group of scientists in the late 1950s, led by Freeman Dyson and Ted Taylor, were building a ship powered by atomic bombs. Most weapons are designed to deliver a payload and then vanish. But in the 1950s, the U.S. Air Force imagined something far more sinister. A weapon that didn't just carry a bomb, it was the bomb. It was called Project Pluto. Its nickname? The Flying Crowbar. It was a nuclear-powered cruise missile designed to fly for months, circling the globe like a hungry predator, waiting for the signal to initiate a one-way mission of absolute destruction. The heart of Pluto was the nuclear ramjet. In a normal jet, you burn kerosene to heat air and create thrust. In Pluto, there was no fuel. Instead, air was shoved into the front intake at supersonic speeds, compressed by the ram effect, and then passed directly through an unshielded nuclear reactor. The reactor, codenamed Tori, was a masterpiece of materials science. It operated at 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt almost any metal. To survive, the engineers at Lawrence Livermore had to create over 400,000 hexagonal ceramic fuel elements that could withstand the thermal shock of a Mach 3 flight. Because the reactor was unshielded to save weight, it was a hot and dirty engine. As it flew, it would continuously spew radioactive fission fragments into its exhaust trail. It was effectively a flying Chernobyl, poisoning everything in its wake before it even reached its target. It carried up to 16 hydrogen bombs. It would drop them one by one as it flew over 16 different cities. It was designed to fly at Mach 3 at treetop level, less than 1,000 feet. At that speed, the sonic boom alone, clocking in at 162 decibels, would literally flatten buildings and burst the eardrums of anyone on the ground. Once it ran out of bombs, the missile wouldn't just stop, it would continue to loiter over enemy territory for days, irradiating the landscape with its unshielded core. Finally, it would fly itself into a final high-value target,